Well, good afternoon. I'm Greg Ayotte. I'm the Director of Consumer Services with the Brain Injury Association of America, and welcome to our discussion about understanding pseudobulbar affect, or PBA. It's a neurological condition that can affect individuals following a brain injury, including stroke, as well as MS, ALS, and other neurologic conditions. And we'd like to thank and acknowledge Otsuka for support for this educational program. And I'm honored today to be joined by Dr. Gary Seal, who brings over 30 years of experience in rehabilitation. Dr. Seal serves as a regional director of clinical services for the Center for Neuroskills and is widely recognized for his work in brain injury rehabilitation and stroke recovery. He holds a PhD in rehabilitation science from the University of Texas Medical Branch, where he also maintains a clinical appointment in the School of Health Professions. Dr. Seal's combination of clinical experience and academic research will really help us shed some light on the different aspects of PBA. So, Dr. Seal, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So, can you kind of explain in layman's terms what exactly is PBA?
So PBA, or pseudobulbar affect, is caused by neurological disease or injury. Again, as you mentioned, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease can result in pseudobulbar affect, as can traumatic brain injury or stroke. Damage usually occurs to the inhibitory systems in the brain, so individuals are unable to modulate or control emotional responses. So PBA, or the consequence of PBA, can be inappropriate or uncontrollable laughing or crying. An individual may laugh or cry at an inappropriate time, or they may laugh or cry appropriately, but just can't stop once they start.
So, from your experience working in brain injury rehabilitation, how common is PBA?
So PBA is relatively rare. Current statistics, research indicates that about 250,000, about a quarter of a million Americans will develop PBA this year. Um, in terms of prevalence, somewhere between 2 and 7 million Americans live with PBA currently. And the reason that range is so wide is because PBA can be confused with mood disorders, particularly depression or bipolar disorder.
So, let me also ask, is it also a condition that can not only present early post-injury, but also later on post-injury as well, right? It's something that can present, even months after the person has kind of left rehabilitation and gone home, where it's not necessarily readily apparent after the injury.
That's correct. And when you think about a person's recovery from brain injury, it's a lengthy recovery process. And so um, professionals and the individual with the brain injury are often focused on other things earlier on their recovery. Sometimes it it is diagnosed or becomes apparent as after someone has left the hospital and perhaps they're in their post-acute phase or maybe even have transitioned home.
So, can you share some examples of how PBA might impact kind of daily activities or the relationships after an injury?
Sure, sure. So the patients with brain injury that I've worked with in the past will say things to me like, I laugh or I cry for no apparent reason, or they report that um, the onset of laughing or crying is sudden, or the smallest thing can trigger an exaggerated emotional response. I've also been told by many individuals with PBA that it can be rather embarrassing for them and can impact daily routine. So they're a little hesitant to engage in conversation or join in social activities, parties, family gatherings, and it can also prevent them from moving out in the community, just shopping, going to a movie or out to dinner for fear that an episode may be triggered and it would be embarrassing for them or their family.
I know one thing that we hear a lot on the helpline from talking to, folks who have experienced PBA and or the families, um, that it's very disconcerting to the families. One, because you never quite know where it's going to happen, and two, when someone has like an episode of crying, they're not necessarily upset or like, the underlying emotion doesn't necessarily match the behavior. That is very kind of unsettling for families to have to, they don't quite know what to do with that. They're like, Wait, but you're crying, but you're saying you're really not upset about anything in particular. You just
Right,
don't
right,
understand why it's happening."
correct.
That can be very unsettling, both for the person with the injury and the family. Like, well, not quite sure what they can do. So one of the things that we also hear is that, because it's happening at unexpected times and it doesn't quite match the underlying issue, how can they tell? What are some things that the person with the injury or the family member might be able to tell if this is PBA versus a emotional response to something?
Yeah, so a PBA differs from a natural emotional response, if you will, because it is caused by an injury or disease to the brain. Um, the response, as you mentioned, the emotional response, the laughing or the crying, may be inappropriate. For example, someone crying uncontrollably at a funeral.
Mhm.
Um, or it may be exaggerated. Someone, say, is at a movie theater, and there's a particularly sad scene or a humorous scene, and the person with PBA begins to laugh or cry. That's an appropriate response, but it's very exaggerated, and the individual can't seem to stop once they begin laughing or crying. So it can be an inappropriate response to the situation or circumstance, or it can be inappropriate but very exaggerated and difficult to regulate once it starts. So that would be the difference between a natural emotional response and PBA.
Okay, that's really helpful. So we were able to have a conversation with a person who has experienced PBA, and we'll show that video, a little short conversation with a person who's experienced PBA and kind of what their story is, what their experience has been in dealing with this condition. And then we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit about kind of the story and just some more strategies that folks might find helpful. So let's take a listen. We're very happy to have Joe Jackson come and join us. He's spoken to us before about his experiences with PBA, and he's been gracious enough to join us again. Joe, thanks a lot for coming on and talking with us a little bit about your experiences.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really
So
enjoy being a part.
we'll give a little background. So your injury happened in
Ha-
2016?
2015,
Close. Okay.
about April or so, about the end of April. But so basically, I was just going down the highway in my vehicle, just headed to Walmart from a small country town to another small country town, put it
Hmm.
that way.
Hmm.
And as I went through this one town, this kid just didn't stop at the stoplight and just ran out and kind of T-boned me. And then I drove off into a field, and from that point on, it was the start of a new adventure.
About how long after the injury did you start to experience like the PBA symptoms, at least that you can remember?
During the first year, it was like, okay, he cries and he is hurting and he has these feelings. Well, uh, what happened was, is so they start to take me off all the pain meds,
Yep.
and all of a sudden, I just start basically crying like 2 or 3 times a day. And what's funny is I'd just be in my bed and set up and look around and reach for water or something, and then all of a sudden you start crying. Like there was just nothing. And
Right.
don't get me wrong, there was still a lot of emotions within me,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it was just instigating itself. But again, so here we go. We have events, and I belong to some different stuff in the community. We go to those community events, have
Hmm.
to leave early.
Hmm.
All of a sudden, I start crying, and sometimes it lasts 30 seconds, and then sometimes it lasts literally like 4 hours. Not just like consistent, but you'd be in your room just
Off and on.
cry, cry, and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
stop, cry, cry, and but then that's where they got that check sheet they got from one of the companies that was doing some research on it, and they sent this checklist home with my wife, and I think it was like a 2 week or a 1 month period where she checked off everything,
Yeah.
and I ended up getting everything checked off. I had everything on that list. It would be neat if I actually had it still,
Yeah. Yeah.
because but it was one where we took it in to the guy that was doing my stuff, and then at the same time, this guy was nice enough where he actually helped me with my appeal on
For
disability,
disability.
because we're
Okay.
going down that road now.
Yep.
Because the
Yep.
first time, by the way, everybody,
Yep.
first time I filed disability, guess what they did? They rejected
Denied
it.
it. Yeah.
So,
Pretty.
or they denied it. Yeah. So if anybody's getting ready to file for disability and that happens, just know
Got to
after
appeal.
you
Yeah.
learn, it
Yeah.
happens to everybody. It
Yeah.
happens to everybody. And
So you had the
but
check, so your wife had filled out the checklist, kind of
yeah,
showing, documenting down the symptoms, what you were experiencing and stuff, and that
well,
you were able to give that to the doc, to show
yeah.
like, oh, yeah,
We
this is
gave that,
going
yeah,
on.
back to him. He actually gave it to us to start with.
Okay.
Uh, but it was, if I remember right, it was a research group that
Okay.
was
Yeah.
putting this together. It was just so he gave it to us. We filled it out. Um, but then that was the thing, is that for now on, now we needed to figure out what I needed medication wise
Okay.
and stuff like that, and
Yeah.
what, etc. But anyway, uh, but I was documenting at one time when it first started. There was about 3 crying episodes a day
Wow. That's a lot.
when it
Yeah.
first started.
Okay.
Uh, and see, what was interesting is the whole time that I was on like painkillers,
Yep.
I did cry, but it was kind of like that drunken cry.
Okay.
Where you're halfway kind of just in
Kind of
and
like,
out of
yeah.
reality, and you're going
Yeah.
to cry a little bit, just sob. Well, we just thought, oh, that's just,
It's a pain, man. Yeah. It's
that's
just
just
pain.
normal. That's just
Yeah.
normal or something. Been a bad accident and all this other thing. Well, uh, but after a while, this crying thing just started becoming like so unbearable. And like my wife was wondering why it couldn't stop.
Hmm.
Like literally, like, like, you know how like you hear a kid start like breathing in really heavy? I was getting that intense in some of my crying. And some of it didn't even have a rhyme or reason. Nothing happened to me. Nobody triggered me, because, of course, the first thing you want to figure out usually is like, well, where was the trigger?
Right.
And there are several times that with the PBA, I started noticing that there wasn't no trigger. It was
So,
just basically like, and I'm not trying to say that some emotional elements could have tied into it, because the more that I grow, the more I learn how to, would you say, duck and dodge
yeah.
through life, because I know like today is a bad day and I can feel it.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, today I'm going to cry. I can feel it. I got to watch out. So I don't try to get myself caught in situations where I'm stuck in public,
So, at what
because,
point were you able to figure out that it was PBA? Was it the doc that finally said, "Hey, this could be
oh,
it," or
yeah. Yeah, it was, and what's crazy is that checklist. That's probably going to be the most sought after thing after this, right? Uh,
yeah.
is that so? He had this checklist. We did it. My wife followed it, and then after that, he was like, this is what I think you have too. And I said, I'm going to diagnose you with this, because what happened was I didn't have any of these behaviors before the accident.
Yeah. Right. So this is very, very
Because,
different. Right.
several groups tried to come up against me on a brain injury and said maybe you're just mental or this or this
Hmm.
or this. But everything evolved around the accident happened and then I changed. But the one thing was is that they ended up like you said, the biggest one was there's one on there is like you just cry for no reason.
Yeah.
And at first, you might not notice it, but after a while, and you cry enough, well, they started adjusting meds, doing different things, and they went from. By the way, you got to do psychotherapy,
Yeah.
and the reason why I say that is because if you don't, you'll wear out your family.
Yeah.
You got to learn to take all that and give it to the psychotherapist uh, as best you can. By the way, I just throw that in there. That'll be extra. So, oh, I'm just kidding. But the whole thing is that so I ended up going on this like I went on a men's retreat once, and it was just like a leap of faith kind of thing to do. But what was funny is I actually went with someone who was a soldier or was a soldier. He was a veteran now, but he had TBI
Hmm.
and had PTSD and all the stuff. So we were kind of like buddies. We just
Kind of bonded
watched each
over the,
other.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Kind of,
and it's
yeah.
like there was times where, I mean, I cried, but I just went down by the lake a little bit and cried. But it's really good when you have someone there to support you,
Kind of help.
where they can do crowd maintenance.
Right.
Because you start crying, of course, people are concerned.
Right.
And I think in church service it was nice because if I just start crying in church service, people will be like, "Oh, hallelujah!"
It's moved by the
Uh,
Spirit.
you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
But so I end up going the trying to get out in public more, and I think that was the hardest thing is that the more I kept having problems. Like one time I was in Dollar General. I always tell this story where I basically just got confused. Because sometimes when they come on, it's like this intense brain fog,
Yeah.
and then just kind of like a confusion. It's not like you're not aware of
Right.
things, but I live in a small town. People know me. People knew my problem. People knew my disability. The manager stepped in and said, "Oh, wait, this is Joe. This is Joe. We just need to get him." Just get him up and get him focused here and see how he's doing. And if we can't, we'll call for help. But other than that, I got up, I brushed myself off, and didn't quite remember everything that happened, like me saying what I said. But I get home, and then I basically just usually take this huge power nap. Because every time you have a little like a crying episode, is that it's almost like it wears you out for like it's like you worked out for 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah.
Uh, but um, but anyway, and then well, I've just been rolling with it.
That's all right. That's all right.
I've
I
been
mean, part of that, I think it's helpful for people to see that one, the kind of the journey to understanding what can happen after an injury is like twists and turns, ups and downs. And it's, the PBA is one aspect of the brain injury, right? There's other things that are going on in addition. So it's not like, oh, we'll take care of the PBA, everything's fine. No, there's other issues still
yeah.
happening. But as you had talked about before, kind of living with the PBA before you had a name to it, like you said, you were always walking around like waiting for the other shoe to drop, right? You were just like, when is this going to happen? You didn't want to go out.
Yeah.
Kind of a recluse a little bit, where it's unnerving, right? You don't what the heck is going on? You're not sure.
Well, I will say this. So, like, I want to give I give a lot of praise to my ex-wife. She stuck through it about a very long time.
Hmm.
But I'll say that's how intense it is, though, is that we were just totally in love, and eventually, because we had to go through the learning curves.
Yeah,
And right now, even in Kansas, where I'm at, there's not a lot of support, as in a people.
right.
There are people with brain injuries all around. We just haven't gathered them yet, and we're working on that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but anyway, the whole thing is that she just got to the point where she was like, "I can't do it no more."
It's hard. It
And
takes a toll on everybody, right? So
that's
it's
because like even I had to go get groceries. She had to set the deal on the phone so she could track me and make sure I got
it
there and got
got
groceries and
back.
came back. Because I live in a small town, we travel to another town, get groceries, come back.
So
Um,
what was
but there's just
the
so many situations, even with the crying thing. It's like we'd be ready to go to a banquet, and all of a sudden I
mm,
start crying. Well, she got to go to a banquet by herself now.
you're like, all right,
I mean,
well,
there's
I'm
just
out.
so many things that happen
Yeah.
that you look back at and you think, "Whoa!" I mean, it just really.
How much that
Uh,
yeah, how much that
so
really impacted you.
I'm just saying, there, yeah, there's going to be a side that's going to really can mess up your life, as in how it was. And you might find it not only you're going to find the new you, but you might be finding the whole new you.
So one of
But
the things I wanted to talk about was, now I think you talked about this before too, was the for you, it really kind of turned the corner a little bit. You said you were pretty open about explaining a little bit about PBA in certain environments, right? They felt like you could explain it and people would listen.
I think what I wanted to do is I wanted a purpose, so I basically grabbed this disability and decided to trumpet it just everywhere. Let everybody know about PBA. Um, First of all, because oh man, it was about to destroy me, and but it's the only thing I had to talk about because of my experiences. You're basically, I hate to say this, but it's just like it makes you very bipolar because you're going from normal to all of a sudden you're bawling like a baby, and and I was like, man, this is so hard. And then of course there's the embarrassment, of course being out in public, and then oh,
Yeah, there we
family,
go.
friends, uh, that don't understand yet,
Yeah, yeah.
always gotten to explain, always this, always that. Even the other day, I had an incident at church where I already had a pre-made letter in my phone where I just sent it off to everybody about what was going on with me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was just like after it was all done, said and done. It happened before church started,
Okay.
and I had a little bit of an incident where I actually collapsed. It was kind of strange. I never had this before, but I've always had the little vertigo. Well, this went on like 15
Yeah,
seconds.
you said it's a
And then
longer
at the
episode.
end, I
Yeah.
fell just like
Okay.
boom. Just
Yeah.
well, I didn't fall over. I just collapsed straight down.
Yeah.
Uh, but the interesting thing is, that only about 30 seconds after that or so, I got back up and I was fine. But anyway, I actually am like a real tech nerd, so I had my phone and I had a pre-written letter, and because even like one of the gals in the band was really concerned. And she was like freaking out. She's like, "Is he okay? We need this and that and this and that."
Yeah.
I'm like, "No,
Yeah.
no, no, no. This happens all the time. Not necessarily the collapsing part, but the vertigo and the weird feeling like you're trying to just like hold your balance.
Yeah.
It's I can't even explain it. It's and I know uh uh, I'm sure brain injury survivors know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But anyway, the whole thing is that so you're trying to like hold yourself up a little bit. You're trying to figure out, wait, is this vertigo? Is this seizure or whatever? But eventually you fall. I mean, I've fell several times and I broke several pair of glasses, and I mean, you name it. Uh, just with the that issue alone. But anyway, I'm still in that mode where I'm still trying to uh, you know, kind of be an advocate. And oh, and by the way, one of the biggest blessings we have to be an advocate right now is some of the different like Chat GPT, or I'm not their poster boy or nothing,
Yeah.
but I'm just saying is that I'm able to write my advocacy stuff, and it's fairly easy to have them assist you. I don't know if
Yeah.
anyone's ever dived into that yet, but like for instance, I'll write something up on whatever issue I'm thinking about, and it'll formalize it,
Kind of
make it
clean it up
nice.
a little. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
make it to where it's presentable. Um, the one thing I always go back to is that it was almost like once I found out kind of what I had, I quit panicking when I had episodes.
So
Because
is that because you had a name to it? Like, what was the thing that changed about that? So you kind of knew it was something, right? He's like, oh, okay, this is something that can happen after an injury.
yeah, I mean, I basically knew that, but at the same time, just going through all the crying and going through all that and just not even know why you're doing it.
Yeah.
It was just totally psychologically confusing. And at
Oh, yeah.
first,
Okay.
it was like I was breaking down mentally fast until I got the right help. And then people said, let me educate you. So now it's like basically I have these problems. And of course, there's that awareness in my head that says if I got to go to my room and I got to just chill and lay down or something and get through this crying episode, I'm not thinking it's like doomsday.
Right. You're like, all right,
And
how
that's
long?
where I think that a lot of people might
Yeah.
be struggling with their PBA, and some have got way past that point. Because I talked to tons of people who said, "Oh, I had that, I had that, I had that." I mean, almost every brain injury survivor said they had it for a while. But what's interesting is that a lot of us people who have had it at first, when we had it, we didn't know what was going on, so it's really easy to start to freak out.
Hmm.
So if you were in those situations where you were crying and just couldn't figure out why, well, guess what? Yeah, we were too, and and it's real, and it's real.
Yeah.
Uh, I totally struggle with isolation, but I'm getting better. I keep getting better, uh, and I keep going forward with that. So that's good. That's good. But that's where I got that therapist. He's always keeping me accountable to push
Good.
forward
Yep.
uh in those areas. And then um but anyway,
Okay.
that's just
Hey,
kind of it, man. I'm just trying
that's
to
it.
just trying to
That's all
make it day
right.
by day.
That's it. One day at a time,
uh,
a little bit
um
at a time. You figure out what you can do and you do it, right? So, well, Joe, I
it's
appreciate
all
you coming on and sharing a little bit about your experiences with PBA and recovery after brain injury. Said it's in, obviously education and information, right? Understanding that this is an issue certainly helps. And in your case, you said you really kind of steered into it and decided, all right, I'm gonna try to teach people about brain injury and PBA. Like this, this is front and center in my world, and I gotta help other people understand it a little bit. So that's clearly been a passion of yours and something you've been really active in. So I think that's so important because it's
thank
something
you.
brain injury is not well understood anyways, and then PBA kind of part of brain injury is kind of extra, not understood. So I think
Yeah,
shedding light and kind of sharing for folks that yes, it does happen, can definitely impact your day-to-day life, but there's some help out there, there's information out there, and we'll share information about some of the resources on like the BIA site around PBA, some of the checklists that we
yeah.
have that folks can use because those can be really helpful in talking to docs as well. But man, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing a little bit about your experience. I appreciate that. Thank you, Joe.
Hey, no problem. I appreciate being a part. Just
Absolutely. Thanks.
so
Okay. So in that interview, so the interview was with Joe Jackson, who is a person with a brain injury and experienced PBA. And in that interview, he talked a lot about how that kind of the experience of the not knowing when something would happen is kind of walking around waiting for the other shoe to drop all the time. Can that in and of itself can kind of create anxiety, certainly created some isolation for him. He began to isolate more because he didn't want to be embarrassed. He didn't know if things would kind of go south for him. So it was a very kind of stressful, anxiety producing time. So what are some of the strategies? So if somebody is thinking this is what they're dealing with, what are some of the strategies that people can do to help manage those PBA symptoms?
I think one of the things that you touched on is having an understanding that this is a condition that can result from disease or injury to the brain. A lot of people really are anxious, upset because they don't understand what's happening emotionally. And again, it can be very disconcerting, very embarrassing. So knowledge is power. So
Mm.
educate people with PBA can educate themselves. There are you literally can go into a search engine and type in PBA or pseudobulbar affect, and lots of information is available. If there are PBA support groups,
Mm.
you can reach out and connect with someone who also has PBA and learn from them about how they manage triggers, strategies they use to minimize symptom expression. Um, the other another strategy for individuals with PBA is to educate others, let people around them, friends, family, if they're working coworkers, to explain that I have this condition, and be aware. And I have some strategies that I will deploy if I'm triggered, but I just want you to know, so you can be supportive. Um, Sorry, my light went
Light one
out.
up.
There are personal strategies. Many of them are involve relaxation.
Okay.
So deep breathing, the moment of mindfulness. Any relaxation strategy can be helpful. Also, there are strategies that involve distracting oneself. So focusing attention on counting,
Okay.
focus your attention on your breathing, and sometimes changing position is helpful. So if you're sitting, stand. If you're standing, move. Um, and obviously, you may want to remove yourself from an environment where you are feeling triggered, to a quiet area where you can use these strategies and calm down. Finally, there are medications that have been shown to be helpful. There's a compound called Nudexta that is prescribed for pseudobulbar affect. Um, the serotonin specific reuptake inhibitor, the antidepressants,
Mhm.
SSRIs, have also been shown to reduce the severity and frequency of symptoms. But obviously, you should talk to your doctor about any other medications you're on, before seeking that intervention. So, while there is no cure right now for PBA, there are useful strategies that allow people to gain some control over the condition.
So do we find this is really helpful? Thank you. Do we find that like other issues after an injury that it's, I don't know if it's more likely or less likely, but that like for some things like headache or fatigue or irritability can happen as the person gets fatigued through the day? Do we know if the uh, like a PBA episode is more likely to happen when somebody seems like that more fatigued, kind of like the filter is not quite working as well, they just not can't process info quite as well. Do we see that kind of being a like a trigger or like a part of the an episode coming on?
Yeah, it can be for some people, um, neurological injury or not. None of us are at our best when we're fatigued
Yeah.
or we're tired, sleep deprived, hungry, dehydrated. So, clearly, a simple strategy is just to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Again, get plenty of rest, um, eat a nutritious diet, a good anti-inflammatory diet can be helpful. Stay hydrated, those things, because again, none of us is are at our best when we're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired.
That is very true. So, what are some of the things too? This is obviously a condition that impacts the whole family. So, what are
Yeah,
some things that family members can do when they want to try to like support their loved ones? What are some strategies or tips for the family member to help that could be helpful?
sure, sure. So again, education is very important. So
Mm.
families should educate themselves. And again, this is something that the person with PBA and the family can do together if they're living together or they're interacting often. They can study the condition together. Families obviously can practice being supportive. Again, this is a condition that is not within the control of the person with PBA. It can be very embarrassing and frustrating. And so just giving the person with PBA a little space, a little grace, being supportive. I think too, it's important, particularly if the person with PBA or the family are able to see patterns, you can plan for episodes, maybe avoid certain areas that or activities that may trigger the episode, and then plan to, find a quiet place to use strategies or relax. Which brings me to another point. I should have said this a moment ago when we're talking about strategies for the person with PBA. It's very important to track episodes,
Yeah. Okay.
collect some data.
Yeah.
So the person with PBA can do that. A family member can do that. But just track those episodes, look for patterns, search for those triggers, so that again that data can inform your response plan. But it also is information that your physician, if you're under condition care for the condition, it's important information that your physician will want as well. Finally, for family members, this working with and supporting a loved one with a brain injury can be stressful in and of itself. PBA, in addition, can be another stressor. So families taking care of themselves, again, resting, relaxing, eating right, exercising, all those things that we do to take care of ourselves. Families should practice that as well.
I would add too, right, trying to get connected with some type of support group or something, like talking with others that get it. May not have exactly the same experience, but being able to talk with others that kind of are in that same boat can
Yeah,
be very, because it's very, I mean, we hear this a
yeah,
lot. It's very isolating, right? You kind of like this I can't be the only one, and it just feels very overwhelming and isolating. And being able to connect with others can make a big difference in just your capacity to kind of continue to manage and try to move
yeah.
forward.
Absolutely. I'm here in the Houston area, and there are several local brain injury and stroke support groups.
Hmm.
We're often invited to speak on certain topics, and I do recall recently at a stroke support group, this being a topic some of the families um, and individuals with stroke diagnosis were interested in talking about. So absolutely, find a support group. If you can't find a PBA support group, a brain injury stroke support group may be helpful as well.
So then you talked a little bit about what the person experiencing PBA might do and the family. Between one or both, what are some tips or strategies or tools that can be used in trying to talk to providers? So if you're the family member trying to talk to the provider about, hey, I think this might be going on, what are some things that could be helpful in those conversations?
That's a great point. Because I'm not sure all providers are
No,
aware
no.
of PBA and its impact. So I think, well, not I think, one of the key strategies is to just be very honest and describe symptoms very clearly, so that the healthcare provider understands the symptoms that you're experiencing. It will also help the provider differentiate PBA again from a mood disorder like depression or bipolar disorder. We want to make sure that the person with PBA is accurately diagnosed and receives the right treatment. Um, when a person with PBA or a family member, when they're interacting with a healthcare professional, make sure that they highlight the impact that the condition is having on their lives. If you're keeping a symptom diary or you're
Mm,
tracking episodes, share that information. It happens this often. It happens in these situations. Um, and then be honest about how it's impacting your life. I would also suggest for individuals who are with a brain injury or other neurological condition that are visiting a healthcare professional, you may want to take a support person with you
yeah, that's a good
to
idea.
take notes, help ask questions. Sometimes I know this is it occurs to me. I'm so focused on what the doctor's saying or sharing information. I forget the two questions I came into the room to ask.
Yes, yes, yes,
So,
yeah,
taking a support person with you can be helpful. Interestingly, I poked around a little bit on some websites, and there is it's called PBA Info,
yeah.
uh,
Hmm.
and in there is a um, sort of a set of questions or information to use when you talk to a doctor. Um, the One of the medications that's prescribed to treat PBA, Nudexa, on their website, they actually have starter cards, um, uh, how to talk to your doctor
Yeah.
about PBA. So there are some websites that individuals can visit and prep themselves a bit before they visit their physician.
Yeah, so the Brain Injury Association has developed the kind of the PBA self-advocacy toolkit, and within that, does a really nice job explaining a little bit about PBA, but it has those kind of the symptom tracking data forms you can use, and I'm a big fan of that. I'm like, you need to talk to the provider in their language. And so if you
Absolutely
come in and say, these are my clinical symptoms, here's my frequency, here's how intense, here's how long it lasted, that's great data to share with a provider because that's something that they get and they're like, oh wait, that could be. So I'm a big fan of trying to give them info in a language that they understand.
right.
Um,
It also helps the conversation be much more efficient.
yeah,
Provide less and less time
right.
uh,
It's really,
you
yeah,
and you can get right to the right to your
right
story.
to the story. Yeah.
It can be very helpful.
But yeah, that's a big part of it, like being able to explain the experience in a way that makes sense to the provider, right? And in a way that is kind of manages the time you have with the provider, right? Because yeah, you can have some limited time with it. Um, well, any other final tips or tidbits of info you want to make sure we share before we kind of get on to the resource part of the
Yeah, again, it's relatively rare, but can be a very disabling condition. Um, so again, if I would just encourage individuals if they feel that they're experiencing PBA to track their symptoms, talk to a professional, and just know again, although it can be frustrating and embarrassing, there are treatments. There are ways to manage this, and individuals can certainly go on to have a high quality and very satisfying life, even with PBA.
Agreed. I'm a big fan of information is power, like you had talked about, understanding this is a physical injury to the brain, this is the manifestation of that. I think that changes the mindset and the perception of folks, not only the person with the injury, but families and caregivers, et cetera, that, okay,
Right.
it's a little different than what we're used to experiencing, but we understand, okay, well, this is another kind of challenge that we can kind of manage and learn more about and learn how to kind of manage it more effectively. So kind of helps to kind of put things in perspective and put a little plan together. Um, so as you can see on the Brain Injury Association of America's website on the biausa.org/PBA, we have our self-advocacy toolkit. We have some fact sheets and tip sheets around PBA explaining it that can be helpful, explaining it to providers, to other families or friends, etc., like trying to explain what this is. Some frequently asked questions, some personal stories, and other educational materials. So there's a wealth of information available on the BIA website. As always, folks can contact the Brain Injury Association, our National Brain Injury Information Center, 1-800-444-6443. You can find that number all over our website. Always welcome to call with questions. Once again, we're grateful for Asuka's support for this educational program to bring awareness and resources and support about PBA. Dr. Seal, thank you so much for joining us today and for kind of sharing your expertise as well. Much appreciated.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
All right. Well, thank you for joining. All right. You take care.